Everyone. Thanks for joining. There's still, I think, a few people trickling in. I also think there might be a lot of people who have registered for the recording but might be in class right now. And that's okay. So if your friends are planning to watch the recording, that's fine. Uh, please do encourage them to actually watch the whole thing. So my name is Heather Lewis. I'm the manager of the international department here at Sault College, and I am very pleased to welcome and thank Elizabeth and Mary from LM Law Group for joining us today for being willing to make a presentation to our Sault College students. Just quick housekeeping, please put your question and answers, if you have any, into the Q&A box and not to the chat. It's easier to manage some of the questions and answers. There will be a little bit of time toward the end of the session where they'll take your questions, so please make sure you put them in there. With that, I'll pass it over to Elizabeth and Mary. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thanks so much for having us. It's always great to be here to meet with you all. It's been quite a time these times. The government is making up a lot of changes to the rules. It's immigration is in the news a lot. And so I can see that for a lot of you guys, it might be a little bit overwhelming as to what you guys need to do in order to stay in Canada. So today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go through some of the things that you need to think about while you have temporary status in Canada as international students and international workers afterwards, and then what you need to do in order to get permanent residence. All right, so first thing, temporary residence. What can you do when you have your study permit? So, when you have your study permit, you'll see on there that there is a validity date, right? But that doesn't mean that you cannot lose your status if just because you hold the study permit. That's because in law, you have to actively pursue your studies. Otherwise, you will lose it after 90 days. If you stop actively pursue your studies, you will lose your student status. Okay. Actively pursuing studies may include, going to classes, you're fully enrolled as a student, writing your exams, etc. Now, there are two exceptions to the rule. One is scheduled breaks. So if it's on the academic calendar and everyone in your program has this break, then that's fine. You're still counted as actively pursuing your studies. The second one is authorized leave. So authorized leave is something where it's very specific to you. Let's say, for example, you have a specific issue for one semester, and let's say you have a medical condition, and you're just not able to be in school at that time. What you can do is go to the school and ask the school to give you authorized leave. And if the school agrees to give you authorized leave, and it can only be one semester at a time, 150 days is the max that you can get authorized leave at any time, okay? So if the school gives you authorized leave, you can take the entire semester off and you don't lose your student status, but you have to get it from the school. Now, working while you are studying. You can only work while you are a full-time student. Okay, except in the last semester, there's an exception. You can be a part-time student in the last semester, but normally you can only work as a full-time student. So for example, if you're on authorized leave and you're not enrolled as a full-time student, you cannot work at all. Okay, similarly, if you become a part-time student, you cannot work at all except in the last semester. Once you've completed your studies, once you get the first indication from the school that your studies have ended, at that point, you're no longer a student, okay? And immigration says at that point, because you're no longer a student, because you've completed your program, you have to stop working completely. You can't work full-time, you can't work part-time, you have to stop working completely. The only time you can work in that situation is if you have already been accepted into another program and it's the semester in between you finishing the program and your new program. For example, let's say I've completed my program in April of this year, and I've been accepted to a new program in September of this year. Then I can work in the summer in between based on the study permit. Okay. Now, there are other ways that you are able to work. If you have a work permit that allows you to work, like an open work permit, for example, for a dependent or a spousal work permit, that of course allows you to work. As a student, though, you are, and if you only have a study permit, then you have to adhere to the rules of when you're allowed to work. As for the hours, that often changes. So before there was some time when you were able to work full time. Then right now it's back to regular rules of 20 hours a week. The government has said that they want to change this to 24 hours a week, but this has not yet happened yet. Okay. So right now it's still 20 hours a week. By the way, uh, the immigration laws in Canada changed so much that it's pretty much like we can't tell you all of the laws. It's right now this is what the rules are, but maybe next tomorrow it might change tomorrow, or certainly down a month later. It's certainly a lot of rules will change. The only way that we're able to keep you guys apprised of the new changes is that could affect you is to add you into our news blast. So if you've registered for this webinar, we're automatically going to add you there. Of course, if you don't like it, you can certainly unsubscribe. But we kind of want to keep you updated on the news. And if you have friends who want to be added, certainly they can go on our website and add themselves on there as well. Okay. All right. Next.
Okay, so another thing that's important to keep in mind while you're studying here in Canada is just understanding what happens at the end of your study permit. So when that study permit is going to expire, how you can either extend your status, maintain your status. And the first thing that you want to do is note down what the expiry date is on your study permit. Do it right now if you can. Put it in your calendar somewhere and pay attention to that date, because when your study permit's going to expire, you need to, if you're going to continue to study, you need to apply for an extension before that study permit expiry date. If you submit a study permit extension before your current study permit expires, then you have what's called implied or maintained status, and you're allowed to keep studying while you wait for a decision on your application. So having implied status does require you to be in Canada while you wait for that decision on the new application. Otherwise, if you leave Canada, your implied status will end, but it allows you to keep studying on the terms of your previous study permit as long as it's been filed properly. Another question we get a lot is what happens if your study permit has expired and you no longer have status? So say you missed that expiration date on your study permit. So you might be able to restore your status if you're in what's called the restoration period. So from the expiry date on your study permit, you have 90 days to apply to restore your status and get your status back. But it's really important to note that those 90 days are very, very strict, and the clock starts ticking from the day you lose your status. So this also applies if you do file for an extension on your study permit, and then if that application is refused, then you have 90 days from the date of that refusal to apply to restore your status. You also, or sorry, go ahead, Elizabeth. Oh, I was just going to make one more note, which is just that you need to make sure if you're applying to extend your status that the application is submitted properly, because if you miss something important, your application can actually be returned to you versus being refused. So if the application is properly submitted and it's rejected, the clock starts ticking from the day of the rejection letter. But if your application is returned because it's incomplete, then the clock started on the day that you lost your status, that your study permit expired. So that's why it's really important to file the extension properly before your study permit expires, so that you maintain your status in Canada.
So Mary, maybe we can talk about what submitting your application properly actually means.
Mm-hmm.
In order to be accepted as an application that has been submitted, you have to have three things. You have to have filed the right forms. The application forms must be the correct one. Secondly, you have to have paid the right fees. And thirdly, you have to have submitted. The application actually went through. You have a submission confirmation. That's when you have properly submitted your application, and then it's not going to, if it's denied, you still, your clock starts running on the date that your application is denied. For example, let's say you applied for your study permit and you didn't attach an acceptance letter. Okay, well, your application will still go through, and your application may be denied at that point, but the date is the denial and you still get implied status. But if you don't pay the right fees or you submit the wrong forms, then your application is returned and it's as if you have not submitted the application at all. Okay. All right, let's talk about your post-grad work permit. Now, the post-grad work permit is really one of the keys to most of you guys being able to stay in Canada. But the thing is that you only get one post-grad work permit in your lifetime. Later on, if you want to extend your work permit, you may or may not be able to do so. And we are seeing right now where we have 1.3 million people with work permits in Canada and only around 200,000 spots for permanent residents, that there are a lot of people who have post-grad work permits and they're about to expire who may not be able to extend their work permit. Okay, so it's very important for you guys in the beginning to calculate and have a plan as to how you might get permanent residence while you still hold your post-grad work permit, or if you need to extend it, how you might extend it. Okay, so the length of your post-grad work permit therefore becomes very, very important. For you guys at Sault College where you're doing non-master's programs, the length of the work permit will coincide. If you have a program of less than 2 years, then it will coincide with the length of your program. So if you're doing let's say a program of 1 year, you get a 1-year work permit only. Now, if you have 2 programs that are each 1 year together, then you get a 3-year work permit, and you can combine those programs together. Of course, anything 2 years or above, you get a 3-year work permit. So, like I said, the length of your post-grad work permit can really, really be important with regard to the planning. Okay, now let's say you want to apply for your post-grad work permit. Well, you also have to make sure that you actually qualify. So there are a couple of mistakes that we are seeing a lot of people coming to us after they've completed their programs and they're not eligible for the post-grad work permit. So I wanted to raise these so you guys don't get yourself into that situation. The first one is distance education. If it has to be less than 50% of your program, okay? Don't go more than 50% for any sort of fully distance education. If the officer knows that, more than half is online, then they can very well deny your application. The second thing is you have to have maintained full-time student status in every single semester, except you get a break with the last semester. Okay. Now, sometimes people say to me, you know what, I just wasn't doing too well in that semester. And so I didn't want to have bad grades on my transcript. So I just decided to drop a couple of courses. Well, if you drop a couple of those courses and it brings you down to part-time student status, and it shows up on your transcript that you only completed, 2 or 3 courses, then the officer could very well deny you your postgrad work permit, and you may be then ineligible. You probably would be ineligible for your postgrad work permit. What I would um, rather, a lot of my clients do would be to even have an F on that course. At least it shows that you took the course, you were enrolled as a full-time student, and then even if it's a bad grade, it's okay. You're still eligible for the postgrad work permit. Okay. Like I said, there's 2 exceptions. One is the final semester, and the second one is authorized leave. If you take an entire semester off and you get leave from the school, that's okay as well. Okay, as long as it's under 150 days at any time. Okay, so let's talk about when now you can apply for your postgrad work permit. The website says that you can apply 180 days. I'm telling you, don't go by that rule, okay? Even though someone may technically be able to apply within 180 days, they wouldn't be able to work while waiting for their work permit. That's because in order to work while waiting for your work permit, you have to hold a valid study permit and have valid student status. And you lose your student status when? 90 days after you've completed your studies, okay? So the rule for you guys to keep in mind should be apply for your postgrad work permit within 90 days of completing your studies, or if your study permit expires earlier than the 90 days, that's your end date, okay? Whichever comes first. And if you do so, then you can actually work while waiting for your work permits. Work permits now take probably around 4 or 5 months sometimes to be issued. And in order for you to work and be able to find a job, you want to make sure that you can work while waiting for your work permit. So just want to go through a brief timeline as to how this will all play out when you're in your last semester. So let's say that you are writing your final exams. Well, you're enrolled as a student, so you can work, okay? You can work part-time right now, according to the rules right now. So you're waiting for your results. Okay, well, you're still enrolled as a student. You haven't gotten the results yet, so you can work at that point. Okay, now Sault College has notified you that your program has been completed. At that point, are you a student? No, you are not a student at that point. You have to stop working at that point. When can you start working again? If you have submitted your postgrad work permit within 90 days of your program and your study permit is still valid. At that point, now you can start working full-time. All right, let's talk about permanent residence now.
Okay, so as you get started looking at different PR routes, you're going to find that many of them require you to have what's called high-skilled work experience. So it's very important to know after you graduate whether a job that you're going to take is going to be considered high-skilled or low-skilled by IRCC, and that way you'll know if it's going to qualify you for PR. So what's the difference between high-skilled and low-skilled work? So IRCC has categorized all the different jobs into different national occupation codes, which are also called NOC codes. The NOC codes are divided into 6 tiers, and tier 0, 1, 2, and 3 are considered high-skilled, whereas tier 4 and 5 are considered low-skilled. The way that your job fits into these categories is based on the duties you do, not the job title. So each NOC code lists main duties that NOC does, and your everyday job duties need to mostly match what's listed there. A lot of people think that if the NOC code title matches their job title, they should qualify for that NOC, but IRCC wants to see that you actually do the duties of that NOC, and they don't care at all about the title. So you can be called the CEO of a company, but if you do the duties of a janitor, then they're going to consider that you're actually the NOC of a janitor. The NOC also lists the mandatory employment requirements for the position, and you want to read those very, very carefully and make sure you meet them. Sometimes the NOC will state that a certain type of education is mandatory, or it's might be usually required. So the difference is very stark there. You need to either have uh, the mandatory requirement. If it is required, you need to have that in order to qualify for that knock. But if it's usually required or it may be required, then you don't need to have it, but it is suggested that you would have it for that knock. So the skill level and the knock code is really important to confirm before you start a job, to confirm that you're going to be able to use it to qualify for PR. And don't make the mistake of just relying on what you've seen your friends do or what you read online, because as Elizabeth pointed out, these rules do change quite frequently, and you need to have proper advice on your specific job and whether it qualifies you for your PR route.
And we've put this link on there so that you can go in and check out different occupations. Um, most of the time, not every job is going to fit directly into one of the listed occupations, but we kind of have to make it fit as closely as possible into one of the occupations. And the reason why that's important is it's very important for permanent residents. Let me go through one of the main permanent residence applications, which is Express Entry. So many of you guys probably have heard already about Express Entry, but there's a lot of confusion about what does Express Entry actually mean? How do I get selected? How do I raise my points? So let me just go through a brief outline first. So in order to start the Express Entry program, you have to first create an online profile. And you get to do so if you qualify under one of three categories: the Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades. Once you've created a profile, you're entered into the Express Entry pool. And you're entered in for 1 year. If you're not selected, you're kicked out of the pool. You can re-enter yourself again. But it's not necessarily that you only care about entering the pool. A lot of times people say, oh, you know what? I've applied for permanent residence. And I say, oh, did you get an invitation to apply for Express Entry? They say, no, I just was entered into the pool. So at that point, if you just put yourself into the pool or somebody puts you into the pool, it doesn't mean that you've applied for permanent residence. Immigration does not count you as having applied just for being in the pool. When you're in the pool, you get a series of points based on your background, and also if you have provincial nomination. And when you do so, the government will issue a draw every 2 weeks or so. And sometimes it's every week, sometimes it's every 2 weeks, sometimes they have a longer stint, but on average every 2 weeks, where they invite certain people to apply. And they invite people based on your comprehensive ranking system points, the CRS points. They may invite people based on category-based draws, which we'll talk about a little bit later, on the category that you entered into the pool. For example, Canadian Experience class is one of the ones that they have been inviting a lot. And also if you have provincial nomination. Now, the provincial nomination is not any provincial nomination. It has to be Express Entry-based provincial nomination, okay? And only if you get an invitation to apply through one of those draws can you then actually apply for permanent residence and submit your application to wait for it to be decided and to be issued permanent residence. If you don't get the invitation to apply, then you cannot apply for permanent residence under Express Entry. So how do we first get into the pool? There are three different categories. The first one is the Federal Skilled Worker class. Now, this is one for anyone, anywhere in the world. You don't have to have Canadian experience. It's work experience that's 1 year high skilled in one occupation that's continuous, full time, okay? And then they look at your other score factors, and you have to have some financial savings, and you need to meet a certain minimum score in order to qualify to enter the pool as a federal skilled worker class. Now, the government has now really concentrated its draws, however, on the second category, which is the Canadian experience class. So the work experience for the Canadian experience class is very different from the federal skilled worker class. The work experience for the Canadian experience class is 1 year of high skilled work experience in Canada that you obtain when you are employed in Canada with a Canadian employer, and it has to be full time, which is calculated as 30 hours a week at least. You have to have 1,560 hours, which is 30 times 52 weeks. And you have to, it has to be high skilled. Okay. So, so this is the work experience that you would obtain when you've graduated. Or, for example, if you have a spouse who has a spousal work permit, they can also get this work experience as well. Okay. So this work experience is very important because a lot of times right now, the government is only, for general draws, only inviting people who entered into the pool on the Canadian experience class. The third one I'm not going to go into too much. It's a skilled trades one. The government hasn't issued any draws for this in a very long time. Okay, so how do you get your score? How does the government calculate your score for the CRS system for express entry? The first one is age. Age, you can't really do much about it except to apply as early as you can. Just to give you an idea, your age points start dropping 5 or 6 points in your 30s every year. And in your 40s, every year, it's a fast drop, -10, -11 points. By the time you get to your 45th birthday, the good news is it doesn't drop anymore. The bad news is you get a 0 in your age points. Compared to people in their 20s who get 110 points or 100 points, that is a huge differential. Okay. So, like I said, it's not about the fact that you can get any younger, it's the fact that don't wait until you get older and your points start dropping. Education. Education is something where if you have at least a 3-year program anywhere, you could have had a bachelor's degree, and then you have another program on top. So if you're doing a Sault College program, if you already had a bachelor's degree, that really that combination really makes your points jump a lot. Okay. Language points. If you don't, especially if you don't have any work experience in Canada, your language points have to be excellent. For IELTS, you're at least a 7 in reading, writing, and speaking, and 8 in listening. CELPIPs would be nice, but right now the points are so high that even that may or may not be enough, depending on your other factors. Relevant Canadian work experience. This work experience is the same kind of work experience I described for your Canadian experience class work experience. Foreign work experience you gain outside of Canada that's high skilled, that could also give you points. And in fact, if you are working remotely in Canada for a foreign company, that can also be counted as foreign work experience. Even if you do it in Canada, but you're working remotely for them outside, that's still counted as foreign work experience. If your spouse has certain levels of education, language points, Canadian work experience, they can add a little to your application. Provincial nominee program. Like I said, it's not any provincial nominee program, but if you have an express entry linked provincial nominee program, that will give you 600 points. And Mary's going to be talking about that. Previous study in Canada. So if you've studied at Sault College for 1 or 2 years, you get 15 points there. and arranged employment. So a lot of people think, oh, I have a job offer and I have a work permit. That means I get arranged employment points, right? No, you only get arranged employment points if you have a LMIA or if you have a work permit that is under the employer specific, an employer specific work permit that's LMIA exempt, and you've worked there for 1 year. And you also need to have a job offer for at least 2 years or so uh, when you file the application. Okay. If you have siblings who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you get 15 points. Fluency in French is really big. If you can be fluent in French, then there's a lot of avenues for you. And for Express Entry, that adds a lot of points. And then trade certification is something where um, uh, if you have trade, you're in the construction trades, and you have Red Seal certification, for example, you can get some points there. Okay. All right, so let's move on to category-based draws. So in addition to those points, the government has layered on another kind of selection for Express Entry. And they have said, for example, well, we want to sometimes only invite people who has a certain level in French, okay? Or a certain level in other occupation, 6 months of work experience in the last 3 years in one of these other occupations. Okay. And so if it is that they have this draw for just one of either French or they have a healthcare occupation draw, STEM, etc., the points are generally much lower than the general draws because the pool is much smaller. They're only inviting people who have this background. So sometimes if you're looking at ways to get an advantage in getting invited to apply, you may want to think about your work experience in one of these occupations. For example, if you're able to drive a truck, then for 6 months and you're able to do that, then you can get into one of the transport occupation draws. Or if you are working as a nurse's aide, you might be able to get under healthcare occupations. So take a look at some of these draws. This might give you an up as well later on.
Okay, so as Elizabeth mentioned, there are other ways to get points in Express Entry through the provincial nominee programs, which are also called PNPs. Ontario's provincial nominee program is called the OINP, and the OINP has several different types of streams. So some of OINP's streams are directly linked to Express Entry, and through these streams, you can't directly apply to the OINP Express Entry streams. To qualify for these programs, you have to actually register an Express Entry profile and be in the Express Entry pool, and then you wait to receive a notification of interest from Ontario. Then, only if Ontario is interested in you and decides to choose your profile out of everybody in the Express Entry pool, then they'll send you a notification of interest, and you can get 600 extra points to your CRS score. So who are they going to be giving these notifications of interest to? So there's 3 categories that they've identified. The first one is the human capital stream. And in order to receive a notification of interest in this stream, you need to be in the Express Entry pool, and you need to have a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's doesn't need to be from inside of Canada. It can be from overseas. And they've also specified certain candidates that they might be interested in for this stream. So historically, for example, they've prioritized people in tech or in healthcare, and they can also, for example, invite people who have job offers, but it's up to Ontario to define who they want to invite in whatever round of invitation they're doing. The next one is French speaking. So in order to qualify for this one, you need to have a bachelor's degree and a high level of French. So a CLB 7 and a CLB 6 in English. And you need to be in the Express Entry pool so that you can receive a notification of interest from Ontario. And then finally is a stream that targets people who are in the skilled trades. So this stream is where if you're in the Express Entry pool and you have at least 1 year of work experience in Ontario within the last 2 years in one of the trades that Ontario has specified that they want to focus on, you could receive a notification of interest. So you don't need a bachelor's degree for this stream, but you do need to have a valid work permit, and you need to have been working for 1 year in a skilled trade that Ontario has listed. If you have those things, you could receive a notification of interest through this stream. Okay, so aside from those express entry streams that give you those 600 points for your CRS score, there's also these other OINP expression of interest streams or non-express entry linked streams. So these streams use what's called an expression of interest system. And to qualify for these programs, you have to register your expression of interest in the OINP website for the particular program that you're looking at. So these streams have a different application process, and they also calculate points differently depending on which category you're applying for. These streams are sometimes really good for graduates from Sault College because they do give you extra points if you have studied in Northern Ontario or if you have a job offer in Northern Ontario. So they can be really great for you guys. So once you've registered your expression of interest in the OINP pool in one of these categories, you're waiting for OINP to do a draw for your program. If they do a draw for your program at your score level, they'll send you an invitation to apply. They don't announce when they're going to do their draws beforehand, so it's best to get into the pool as soon as you qualify because you never know when they're going to do another draw. If you get selected and they give you the invitation, then you send in your documents and apply for your nomination. And once your nomination is processed, then you apply for PR through the federal government. And there's several different types of expression of interest streams. Some require you to have a certain level of education, like a master's or PhD stream, and others are based on having a job offer from an Ontario business. So let's talk about those employer-based streams. So for these streams, you as the applicant have to meet certain requirements, and then your employer also has to meet other requirements. You need a job offer that's going to from an employer that's been in business in Ontario for 3 years. If the business is inside of the GTA, they have to show that their gross income in the last fiscal year was 1 million and that they have 5 full-time Canadian or PR employees. And if they're outside of the GTA, they have to show that they have 500,000 in income and 3 full-time Canadian citizen or PR employees. The job offer itself has to be full-time and permanent, which means there's no end date in your contract. And then within this category, there's 3 different streams. So there's the international student stream. So firstly, to qualify for this stream, you need a job offer that meets those requirements I just listed. And you need to have completed your program of study in Ontario, and you need to apply within 2 years of graduation. You also need to have graduated from an eligible program. That means you've done either a 2-year degree or diploma program in Ontario or a 1-year college program that grants an Ontario College graduate certificate. Aside from having qualifying education that you did within the last 2 years, you also need a high-skilled job offer that's full-time, and you need to be paid at least the low wage for your occupation according to your location of employment. The next stream is the skilled worker stream. So for this stream, you also need a job offer that meets those requirements above, and you also need to have 2 years of work experience within the last 5 years in the same occupation as your job offer. That work experience doesn't need to be in Canada, and it doesn't have to be in Ontario. It just has to show that you do have those 2 years of work experience within the last 5 years in the same knock as your job offer. It does have to be high skilled, and the salary that you're going to be offered has to be the median wage for your region. But there are no education requirements for that stream. And then finally, there's the in-demand job stream. So the OINP has a list of occupations that qualify for this program. It's not just every occupation, it's a very specific list. And it's one of the programs that does include low-skilled job offers and positions. So you want to take a look at the list of jobs that Ontario is focusing on in this area. And if you or maybe your spouse is in a low-skilled position, you could potentially qualify here. In order to qualify, you need to have 9 months of experience in Ontario that's in that same position, but it can be with a different employer. And you need to also be offered the median wage level for that occupation in your region.
Okay, so I just wanted to let you guys know, from an immigration standpoint, I refer a lot of students to go up to Sault College. Not only because I mean the school is fantastic and the staff really, really do care very much about you guys. But from an immigration standpoint, it is a trifecta of advantage. So you have, first of all, you're not going to Quebec because Quebec immigration, unlike the rest of Canada, is it is really, if you think, you know, the express entry program is hard, you should go to Quebec. It's much longer there. So you're not in Quebec. That's great. You're eligible for the express entry system. Then you're in Ontario and you're in Northern Ontario. Northern Ontario students and people who have job offers in Northern Ontario get the most points for selection for OIMP. Great. Check number 2. Number 3. Now we come to the new Rural Community Immigration Pilot Program. It used to be called the Rural and Northern Immigrant pilot program, the RNIP program. The RNIP was just finished this summer, and the new program is supposed to be announced any day now. Okay, but we don't know exactly what the new program is, but I highly suspect that it will be the very similar program to the old RNIP program. And if it is, then it will be very much a community-based selection program. That means the city of Sault Ste. Marie, which was a participant in RNIP and will likely be a participant in RCIP, will be the ones who are selecting, first of all, who is going to be selected for this program. And normally what they look at is they will want to have someone who has a qualified job offer in the community. And this doesn't necessarily have to be high skilled. It could be a low skilled position. There's no, I mean, in the last one at least, there wasn't a distinction between whether it had to be high skilled or low skilled. Low skilled, high skilled, all qualified depending on what the community wanted. And those normally in the last program, those who attend a education program in the community, like you guys are doing in Sault College, will likely receive a benefit. For example, the old program, if you were graduating from a qualified program, then you didn't have to have the 1 year of work experience that other people would have wanted and needed. Okay, so lots to see. I don't know what the exact rules are. When the rules do come out, then we'll certainly send out a news blast and we'll go over this, and we might even, you know, have another webinar as well on something like this. Okay.
And then another option that's hopefully going to be coming up soon is the caregiver stream. So this is a program that is not currently announced yet, but we're expecting the program to be opening shortly. Historically, this program has always been in some form allowing people who are caring for elderly people or children in Canada to have a pathway for PR. And the way that it normally works is that you need to have work experience caring for somebody in their home. So, not, for example, in a hospital or a nursing home, but actually in a private individual's home. Um, and it also requires a high school diploma and a CLB level of 4 for your language ability. You also need to have a job offer normally to go through this program. So they've made some changes to the old program, such as those language requirements and the education requirements, but we don't know what the rules are for this program yet. It's another one that's going to be very important to watch, and we'll be providing updates as soon as the new rules are announced, which we hope will come shortly.
Okay, so there are a lot of people right now in Canada on work permits. Last I heard, the statistics was 1.3 mil, and the government target this year is only 211,000. Only 100 or so thousand of that is half of that is express entry. So here are some points that you can think about if your points high enough right now for the express entry draws.
Okay, so the first thing you want to do is make a plan about what you're going to do to raise your points. There's lots of different ways that this can happen. One that's very common these days is increasing your work experience. Either inside of Canada, you get a certain number of points for each year, but also outside of Canada. If you don't have any foreign work experience, it can give you several points just to get 1 year of foreign work experience. Another one is increasing your language score. So these days, you really need to have good language scores to be able to be competitive for express entry. We normally recommend rewriting your language test if you don't have CLB 9s, which is on an IELTS test that's 7s in everything and 8 in listening, or 9s in everything on your CELPIP. Another thing you could think about doing is increasing your education. So if you are at a certain level now, you might want to pursue further education later. That can be a good way to raise your points. Um, Another one is getting arranged employment, which is if you can get a closed work permit from your employer, then that can give you 50 extra points through express entry if you meet certain conditions. And that can be a great way to put your application over the edge into the competitive region for CRS points. Another one is trying to get work experience under those category-based draws. So Elizabeth listed all the different categories that IRCC has targeted, and that can be a great way to enhance your options for PR if you're able to get 6 months of work experience in one of those areas. Another one is increasing French. So this is very popular these days. Lots of people are studying French. If you can score CLB 7s on your French test, it can give you 50 extra points under express entry. And there are certain work permits that are associated with it as well. So it can be very, very advantageous to be a French speaker at this time. And then finally, looking at whether you qualify under one of the P&P programs that I listed earlier, maybe getting a job offer or qualifying under one of those can be another great way to raise your points or just find ways to get PR through different programs.
I just wanted to say, on that sort of other kinds of closed or employer specific work permits, there are different kinds of work permits. There's the LMIA, which, is the default where the employer usually has to show they can't find a Canadian to do the job. There are other LMIAs where there are like global talent stream LMIAs where an employer has to, for STEM occupations. They just have to have a labor market benefit plan. There are other there are other work permits. For example, if you're French speaking and you only pass the listening and speaking of CLB 5, very low, just speaking and listening, we can get you a francophone work permit to do work anywhere. There's free trade agreements if you're nationals of certain countries and you have a job offer here in certain occupations, you might qualify. There's international experience class, whereas if you're nationals and you're young persons of certain countries, you can get work called the young professionals work permits here. So all sorts of different kind of work permits you may or may not qualify for, and certainly come to us and we can look at some of those options for you. Um, and then if you really, your points for express entry are really just not going to be high enough, or you want to have a backup plan, we should really take a look at, other kinds of programs that could have you qualify. And then we have, yes, like international student streams, for OIMP, for example, or caregiver programs. There's rural community programs or other provincial nominee programs in other provinces. Caregiver entrepreneur routes. Entrepreneur routes, it's not a program per se. There's different programs that you can use if you want to be an entrepreneur. That's certainly we can talk about that.
Mhm. Another important thing to keep in mind during your pathway to PR is just to keep in status. So, first of all, getting as long as you can on that postgrad work permit. It's a great opportunity to get work experience here in Canada, and you really want to make sure that you're maximizing your time. So, definitely trying to get the 3 year work permit is key. Another is think about how you're going to be able to extend your work permit beyond the postgrad work permit. So, if you're not going to have your points that are going to be high enough to get an invitation to apply by the end of your postgrad work permit, think about ways you can maybe work with your employer. As Elizabeth mentioned, there are lots of different types of work permits that you can explore. And that would be a good idea to meet with us to see what your options might be. And then finally, also think about teaming up with your spouse. So if you are married or in a common law relationship, which is where you've lived with a partner for 12 months continuously in a conjugal relationship, they are considered your spouse for immigration purposes. And that means that if they get an invitation to apply and they become a PR, they can include you in their application. So don't just focus on your own application. Think about what's your spouse doing. Maybe they're working in a field that immigration has targeted. Maybe they have different opportunities for study, or there's lots of different ways that spouses can be very useful in immigration. So keep that in mind while you're making your plan.
Yeah, it's not just that you love them, they're it's also very useful as well. And there's one thing that you have to also consider. Sometimes people say, oh, yeah, we're common law, but we just want to apply separately. Right now, immigration has said that if your spouse does want to get permanent residence and they are accompanying you, you can't just say that they're not accompanying. That's actually, they say that that's misrepresentation as well. So if you have been living together for at least a year, even if you're not married, your status changes, and you must make sure that you are declaring that on everything, including your permanent residence applications, including your work permit applications, study permit applications. When they ask you what your marital status, you must declare it properly. And plan some more. And this is where, even though laws change so rapidly, you often have to have at least not just a plan A, but a plan B and a plan C and a plan D as well. Because if you don't, then, sometimes you can find yourself doing all sorts of things that you thought were good for your situation. And it turns out that actually you were wasting your time. So that being said, we're coming to the questions portion of it, but I did want you to know that you can always email us to schedule a consultation so we can provide you with a proper personalized plan for your situation. We offer Sault College students a discounted rate. It's only $100. We do it by Zoom. You don't have to come to our office, and we'll just sit down and we'll hash it out. Let's figure out a plan for your future. Okay. All right. So we're coming to the question and answer period. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A section, the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Put it in and we'll get going on these questions.
Okay, I'll start with the first one.
Mhm.
So I applied for my study permit extension on May 1st. However, my application is still in process and my course began in September 2024. I'm required to submit my visa and co-op work permit by the end of this month, but I haven't received a response from immigration. The processing time is exceeded and I haven't received a response in a web form. What can I do and what should be the next step?
Okay, so if you had already had a study permit before and you applied to extend it before your study permit ended, you have implied status. You are legally able to continue studying while waiting for your study permit to be issued. If you didn't have the study permit before, and I don't think that's the case because this person said that they applied for study permit extension. So I think they had the study permit extension. Now, the co-op work permit, if you had the same thing, if you had a co-op work permit before, you filed to extend it before it expired, and your co-op work permit, the decision has not been made yet, you also have implied status on the co-op work permit. Now the question becomes, well, what if I didn't have the co-op work permit before? I only had a study permit, and then I applied for a study permit extension and a co-op work permit. In that case, then you aren't able to work based on the co-op work permit until the co-op work permit is issued. However, you can work based on your study permit situation. So you could work 20 hours off campus while you are a full-time student. So, maybe you might be able to get your co-op hours in under that while you're waiting for your co-op work permit to be issued.
Great.
Okay, so Mary, someone said, uh, will someone who is going regular, I'm not sure what going regular, I guess they're just saying they're doing a regular 1-year course program, will they be eligible for a postgrad work permit?
So, assuming that you're graduating from Sault College and you're doing an eligible 1-year program, you should be able to get a 1-year postgrad work permit. But as Elizabeth mentioned, you really want to think about what is your long-term plan before you apply for your postgrad work permit. Because you only get one, you may want to consider taking another course so that you can do a 2-year total study and get a 3-year work permit, which usually has a much better chance of actually getting PR. And it can be something definitely worth thinking about before you actually apply for that postgrad work permit. Okay.
Okay.
My first program was a 1-year program from January to August. Now I've transferred from 1-year program to a 2-year program. Starting in January, I'm on break right now. Can I work full time before applying for a study permit extension? My current study permit is valid till December 31st, 2024.
This is an interesting question. If you are on a scheduled break, if the break is scheduled into the calendar, then yes, you can work full time on that scheduled break. If it is a 1-year program that's completed and you starting another 1-year another program in January, then in between you can work as well.
Great.
Okay, so uh, I this person says they're studying at Sault College with a cybersecurity course 1 year. They had their bachelor's back in India. Are they eligible for permanent residence after having 1 year of work experience, or do they need to extend their study permit as well?
So I would recommend that this person comes for a consultation with us so we can talk about the different options they might have. Um, we would want to see what their score might be in express entry. We would want to see just a couple other things that I would need to know to really answer whether they'd be eligible or not. I'm a little confused about the part that says, do they need to extend their study permit as well? This would depend again on the length of the course. It seems like you might be doing a 1-year course. So you might want to think about a second one so that you can get a longer postgrad work permit. But I do recommend just coming for a meeting with us and we can sort everything out. Okay. I changed my program from GBM without co-op to PDSS with co-op. I already applied for a co-op permit. Can I work part-time, 20 hours off campus, or do I need to wait for the approval of my co-op permit?
So you can work part-time 20 hours off campus because it's based on your study permit. That's allowed. But as to whether or not you can work full-time for like with a co-op work permit, then no, you'll have to wait until you get the co-op work permit. And the co-op work permit, by the way, guys, doesn't give you carte blanche to work full-time anytime, anywhere. Okay. The co-op work permit only allows you to work full-time for your co-op program. So if you, and it has to be integral to your education. So if you've completed your co-op that work component and you continue to want to work for that employer, you cannot work based on the co-op work permit. You'll have to work based on the conditions of your studies, or if you have a postgrad work permit, or you've applied for postgrad work permit, etc. You can't just say, oh, I have a co-op work permit that allows, it doesn't expire yet, so I can continue to work. Okay. I attended a 1-year pre-health science course last year. Now I am in a 2-year practical nursing program. Can I have a 3-year postgrad work permit or just 2 years?
So the rule is if you take a 2-year program, then you qualify for a 3-year postgrad work permit. So what I'm seeing here, it looks like you should be eligible for a 3-year postgrad work permit based on what you've said. Okay. I'm from the Toronto campus, taking business for a 2-year program last year and shift this year here at main campus for 2-year metal fabrication program. My question is, should I apply as early as now for my study permit extension since my program will finish in April 2026? My current, I think, study permit will expire in April 2025.
hmm So there's two things. Number one, you even if you because you the DLI numbers, I'm not sure if it changes from Toronto campus to Sault College campus. You'll have to double check, but you may need to notify immigration that you're changing the campuses, and maybe Heather can advise you on whether or not and how to do that if you need to do that. As to whether or not you should apply to extend your study permit, um, I would generally put your application in even as early as 5, 6 months beforehand. Sometimes they're not supposed to take that long, but sometimes they do take longer than expected. And it's always nice to have a study permit. Now, if you don't have your study permit issued by the time your current study permit it ends in April of 2025, but you filed the extension, you have implied status. As long as you don't leave Canada, you can continue to study in Canada as well. Okay. Mary, this person is studying in a second 1-year program, and it's over around April or May, and the study permit expires next year in September. So just to confirm, should they apply in the last month of their studies, or should they wait until their studies end to apply for the postgrad work permit?
Mhm. So you need to wait until your studies are completed to be eligible for the postgrad work permit. You can't apply for it while you're still studying. You have to wait until you've completed the requirements for your course. So you'll need to wait until it's done, until you have your completion letter from your school, and then you can submit your work permit application at that time.
Okay.
Okay. And what should I do if my postgrad work permit expires and I've not received PR? Do I go back home or apply for restoration of status?
Well, that's a very good question. It's a very important question. Unfortunately, it's not a question I can answer right now because I don't know the details of your case. Come to us, send us an email. We'll set up a consultation and we'll go over what your options are. All right. Well, we've finished all the questions. That's a good one today.
And a rare one.
Yeah.
And I can confirm we have different DLI numbers on each campus. So if a student has transferred from Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie, do make sure you've changed your DLI number in your portal.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you guys all for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, Heather and Jessica, for hosting and arranging everything today.
Thank you both for your time, for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your insight. It's really appreciated. And it feels like the world of immigration gets more and more complicated every month. There's always a new layer. And I just see there's one question, where can we find your work office? So maybe if you can pull it just up on the screen as a closing point where they can send their inquiries again.
Yes. So our office is in downtown Toronto. Now, I suspect that a lot of you guys, well, even people in Toronto, they don't have time to come all the way, go through traffic to get to our office. So we do all of our consults now with Zoom. So just email us and we'll set up a time to have a consult with you. Anywhere in the world, we can do it.
Thank you both for your time. We really appreciate it. And just as a confirmation, the recording will be sent probably in the next couple of days. Once everyone's had a chance to kind of clean it up, we'll get the list. So anyone registered should get the recording.
Excellent. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, bye-bye.